Hey everybody, welcome back to Ready Steady Play, where we're doing the setup and rules video for Detective City of Angels. And Detective City of Angels is a crime-solving puzzle game set in 1930s LA. The game is for 1 to 5 players. In the classic mode, one player is playing as the Chisel, who controls events, plays as the non-player characters, and tries to throw the detectives off the scent of the real crime. The other players play as detectives who are competing to see who can solve the crime first. In Detective City of Angels, there are 9 crimes, although one of them, Blood on the Pier, is a very light tutorial crime, and you'll probably have to play that just to learn how to get into the swing of things. Once you've played that, then you can play from the other 8 crimes, 2 more gumshoe level crimes, which are the easiest, making them the most difficult for the Chisel, or 3 veteran or 3 hard-boiled detective level crimes, which are the hardest for the detectives and the easiest for the Chisel. The game takes roughly 30 to 150 minutes to play, and that of course depends on the case and the aptitude of your detectives. Each case will begin the same. There'll be a prologue describing the crime and what the cops have discovered so far. They'll describe the scene of the crime and give you a few early leads. After that, it's up to you to wander around 1930s LA, exploring the leads, trying to get new leads, ultimately trying to uncover the murderer, the murder weapon, and the motivation. Once you think you have these 3 things sussed, you can take a stab at solving the crime. And if you're right, the game is over and you've won. If you're wrong, you'll discover how many of those elements you've got right, and then you'll have until the end of the game to figure out the rest. If no detectives are able to get it at the end of the game, then the case goes cold and the Chisel is the winner. Unfortunately, you can't really repeat a case in Detective City of Angels. You've got one-shot detectives to get it right, and after that, the only way for you to replay the scenario is to become the Chisel yourself. So with that in mind, I'm going to run you through the setup and rules of this game, but I'm not going to spoil anything. And that means that there's going to be some elements, game elements, that we just can't look at. Specifically, something called mystery cards, which come in some of the cases and augment the rules or shake things up to keep you on your toes. Fortunately, with this fundamental primer, you'll easily be able to cope and roll with whatever punches may be thrown your way. So with that in mind, let's have a quick look at what's in the box, and then we'll set up for a case. You've got a lot of documentation. You have, of course, got a rule book, which is what we're going through right now. You've got this tutorial book, which is basically a play-by-play of the first case. So you and your friends and the Chisel will go through this together, and you'll be walked through the first half of the case to explain how the gameplay works and the fundamentals. These are essentially player aids. They've got the prologue for each case in them, as well as reminders of what actions the players can take, and, very importantly, the motive list. Pay close attention, detectives. This is the motive list. This motive list is all the potential motives for the murderers in the game. And of course, you've got one of those for each of your detective players. The Chisel is the casebook and solutions. This is the Chisel's version of these player aids, which also has the epilogue, which is a detailed account of what happened during the crime. This also has some handy stuff for the Chisel in it, such as a list of all the locations and pieces of evidence that can be discovered during the case. And this is the Sleuth casebook. This is only used if you're playing by yourself or in like a 2-player co-op format. And this is used to replace the Chisel if you haven't got them. And it turns the element of questioning in the game and sort of interrogation into much more of a sort of a choose-your-own-adventure type situation. This is the detectives' notebooks, and this is where the detectives will be recording all the information they uncover during the case. This is a punch board with a bunch of standees on it, but as you can see from this important information, we're not even supposed to see which standees have been punched out, and we're not supposed to punch them out before the crime either. Here's our board of 1930s LA, with all the stuff on it. You'll be moving around this board, looking for clues and trying to find people. This is the Chisel's board, where they track their leverage over the detectives. More on that later. Here we've got a bunch of different detective player boards. They're all identical, but in different colors, and with slightly different art. These are what the detectives will use to track how much money they've got and what actions they've taken this round and how many they've got left. And these are the sleuth grids, and these are used to uncover clues in the sleuth mode, which is the cooperative version. This marker is used to track where the crime scene is on the board. This one's used to track what day it is on the board. Here we've got little tokens that are used to track evidence that has been recovered by detectives but not checked into the police inventory. Speaking of which, here are some evidence removed cards that go with those. We've also got some favor cards and some grift cards. These are one-shot powers for the detectives and a one-off power for the chisel. This is the arc holder for the game's unique questioning system. Don't worry, we'll look at this in more detail later on. We've got 4 identical player bags here. Each player bag has a bunch of these police badges, which are referred to as knowledge tokens. We've got these police hats, which are leverage tokens. We've got these red action cubes. Of course, this is the red player set. All of this would be in a different color for a different detective. We've got 2 snitch tokens. One says bribe and the other says pass. And this is a base for the mini. Oh yeah, and this is for your guess, to see if you can guess the case correctly. And so we've got 4 detective minis as well, so you can decide which of LA's finest detectives you would like to be. Oh yeah, and a bunch of scratch, which is just money. If you are the chisel, you'll get a box like this, which has all your goodly chisel bits in it. You'll have a list of the full components on the back. Note that it doesn't list the numbers of NPC standees that you need, and of course the case code there as well. So this is the case number 1, the tutorial case. Now inside you will have a number of case cards with letters, and on the other side there will be pertinent information relating to the case. These are likely bits of evidence, but they could also be characters. Card A is always the victim. And then usually there's a number of cards that are persons of interest that need to be explored further. Later cards might be evidence or additional persons of interest to interview. The harder the case is, the more of these cards there will be. You'll also have a series of numbered dialogue cards like this with different options on them, and a small deck of search cards like this, which will tell you where things have been hidden on the map. So these are for when characters or locations are searched. There are, of course, the mystery cards too, but don't worry too much about those because by the time you get to those ones in the harder cases, you should have a pretty good grasp on how the game is played, and you should be able to implement them without too much trouble. So, with that, it's time to move into the setup. I'm going to set up a 3-player game, and I'll explain what I've done once I get that set up. So here we've got a basic setup for 3 players, but we've not yet set up the case. So the first thing you're going to do is put the board in the middle of the table and put the marker on the day based on the number of players. 9 for 2, 8 for 3, and 7 for 4. Note that the case may specify variants to these numbers, so make sure you read the case notes carefully. Each player has, of course, got their model. Each player has a player section like this with their player board. They've got their 4 action cubes in these available spaces along the top of their player board. They've got their 2 snitch tokens here with bribe and pass on the underside. Then they've got their hats over here, their knowledge tokens down here. And if you're the first player, you start with 4 scratch. If you're the second player, you start with 5 scratch. The third player starts with 6, and the fourth player starts with 9. Remaining scratch is placed in here on the pool on the board. The chisel starts with their chisel board with 1 leverage from each player on it. The chisel also needs the arc cover, these confiscated evidence tokens, this crime scene marker here, the evidence removed reports, the grift cards and favor cards. Note these are optional, you don't have to use them if you don't want to. And as we saw in the components section, you've got cards associated with the case specifically. Now you've got all that set up, you might want to have some kind of screen or something to help the chisel protect their information, but you can take the dialogue questions and just put them under the arc cover like this. Take the search questions, keep them over there out of sight, and then you take the evidence questions. We're going to put them out on the board now. They'll just go over the corresponding letters along the top of the board like this. Finally, if you do want to play with the favor cards and the grift cards, they must be used together. Deal 1 favor card to each detective, and 1 grift card to the chisel. Put the rest back in the box, you won't need them this game. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go through the prologue to the game. So we're sort of starting gameplay, but there is still a few bits of setup left to do. So this could also fall into the category of setup. But we'll read the prologue of the case. And this says a few important things. Other than setting up the story and the crime that we're going to be solving, this also instructs you to flip over a number of these cards. And then we put out the crime scene marker. We'll just assume that this is somewhere on the board. Now with that information, players can take these player detective sheets and fill them out. On these sheets here, what you can do is you can write the name of the case, and then you can write down here the information about the case cards. So if A is, for example, the murder victim, you can write their name in here. And then down the side here, you write any suspects in the case. And these will often be case cards as well. So for example, case card B might be your first suspect, so you'd put their name in here and in here. And this will allow you to track whether you've spoken to a specific suspect about a specific piece of evidence. And it should be noted that you can, of course, talk to a suspect about themselves. This will also be used for solving the case and making your final guesses down here. So we'll look at that a bit later. Van Ryder Games have fun acted recordings of the prologues on their website, and I'll put a link to those in the description below so you can find them for your games at home. But with that, we're actually ready to start playing the game. The game takes place over a series of days. The detectives want to solve the case before the day comes to an end. They're going to have to work together to piece the case together, but they're also working against each other to be the first one to reach the final solution. When a detective thinks they have the solution, at the beginning of their turn, before they take any actions, they may try to solve the case by cashing in their solve token with the chisel. They'll write down their best guess, which consists of a murder weapon, a murderer, and a motive. They'll write their solution down here and hand it over to the chisel. Then the chisel will simply tell them how many of these things are correct. If they write 3, then the detective's the winner and the game ends. But if it's not 3, they'll notice that something is wrong and they'll need to fix them. They'll have one final guess to get it right before they lose the game. You always make the final guess when you've run out of days and the game comes to a close. Both players will write down a final guess. Then the chisel will read the epilogue from the chisel book, which is sort of the actual details of the crime that took place. Then the players can reveal dramatically their final guesses to find out whether or not they were right. If any of the detectives were correct, they're the winner. And if more detectives are correct, then it goes in player order. So in this case, red is our second player, with green going first. So if both are correct, red's the winner. But if neither have solved the case correctly, then the case goes cold, and the chisel's the winner. Each player has 4 actions to wander around the city, uncovering evidence, and trying to solve the case. They'll use these 4 actions, and then when a player has exhausted all 4, play will pass to the next in turn order. Once all players have had a turn, then the day marker will move on, and the play will continue. The chisel doesn't actually have any turns at all. They just control the game elements that are ongoing while the players wander around the board interacting with things. The vast majority of the chisel's role is going to be choosing the dialogue options for the game characters. They'll want to listen closely to what the detectives are saying and try to use the characters' scripted lies to throw the detectives off the case. However, if you think one of the players won't buy it or already knows the truth, then you might not want to try bluffing on this occasion and just give them the most useful answer. And I'll talk about what that means when we get to questioning. Let's have a look at our player board and what actions are available. So you can see on the player board here we've got move, question, search location, search suspect, analyze, and kickback. Now these moves you around the city, question allows you to question game characters, search location and suspects allows you to search for clues, analyze and kickback are ways of getting more scratch, which you'll need to perform these 4 actions up here: goon, snitch, detective, and officer. These allow you to get evidence when you might otherwise be prevented from doing so. Moving around the board is really very simple. On the very first day of the game, the very first player will take their detective and place them in one of the police stations on the board. There are 3 types of buildings on the board. You've got regular white spaces, which are just buildings. You've got these blue shields, which are police stations. And you've got these orange square locations, which are gang hideouts. Our green player can decide to start in any of these police headquarters, and they should probably be looking for the location of the crime scene and the locations of the suspects in order to get started. We'll say for the sake of this example, we're going to start in the LA Police Department headquarters. As you can see, the board is divided up into districts. We've got the South Bay down here, the San Gabriel Valley here on the east side, the north section is Hollywood, then west side on the west, and central LA in the middle. When a character takes a move action, they move a single cube from here down here to show that that's what they've done. Then they can move anywhere within this district, so they can move from any location to any other location. If you want to move between districts, you should move to a location on the border between two districts. This now enables you to move anywhere inside either neighboring district. Some locations even border 3 districts, giving you a massive scope to move to. You can take as many move actions as you want on a turn, but all locations can be reached with 3 moves. The next action you can take is question, but I'm going to look at that at the end. Let's go on to search location. If you've stopped at a location, you'll tell the chisel, I would like to take a search location action. We'll move one of our cubes down to the search location section here. You'll notice most search cards look like this, and the chisel will check the deck to find out whether there's one that matches the number of the location you're on. I realize you can't see any of this text because I've blurred it out deliberately, but there's a number in bold and black at the top, and then the text of what the detective finds at the bottom. If this card matches the location they're at, then you give it to them to read, and when you're done you just return it to the deck. Some location cards have a slightly different back like this one. This means that they've got the archive keyword, which is present down in the bottom corner of the card. What this essentially means is that once a detective has searched this location, they've found something important and it cannot be searched again. Once a card with the archive keyword has been discovered, we'll move it over here to the archive section of the player board. Now all other players know that that location has been searched and all the useful information has been found. Characters are searched in the exact same way as locations, and can be archived in just the same way as well. If there is no location card in the deck, then you hand the player this one, which is just a generic there's nothing here card for all locations that don't have anything in them. And so searching a suspect exactly the same as searching a location. So next up we've got Analyze, and if you ever take the Analyze action, you just get 1 scratch from the generic pool here to your player board. If you take the Kickback location, then you get an amount of scratch equal to the number of players, which includes the chisel. So in our game here it'd be 3 scratch. It should be noted that the Kickback action, which is obviously much more efficient than the Analyze action, can only be taken once per turn, and only if you're at a mob joint. Essentially, this represents your corrupt cop going in here and shaking down the criminals and taking a bribe instead of turning them in. So that just leaves one thing to look at. Ask a suspect at your location a question. This is the primary way you're going to be trying to find out information. And this is the primary way the chisel is going to be giving you misinformation as well. Asking a suspect a question requires you to be at their location. So of course we would have standees on the board denoting exactly where everyone was. You would move to their location, wherever it might be, and you would take the question action. And there's a very specific way in which this is done. The first thing that would happen is you would pick the suspect and then pick an evidence card to ask them about. Maybe some of the evidence is hidden as well, and we'll get to that. And maybe some of the evidence is known to you but hidden from the other players. And we'll get to that. But you must know what evidence is before you can ask about it. So, if for example we went to talk to suspect B, we couldn't ask about evidence E, F, or G because we don't know what it is and we haven't seen it. We could ask B about A, B, C, or D. So we would say to the chisel, I would like to ask suspect B about suspect B. The chisel will then reference a grid in the chisel book. Remember this book here? Well, this has got all of the potential answers that the chisel might provide in it. It will have a number of options between 1 and 4. And the chisel will pick one of them to provide to you. If there's only one option, the chisel has no choice. But one of the 4 options will be marked as the most useful information. Now this is the response the game has identified as giving the players the most useful information. But it should be noted that doesn't mean it is useful, because a lot of the suspects are liars and cheats and scoundrels, and they might give you bogus information. They might give you incredibly misleading information. So the most useful information might also just be the least unhelpful. Once the chisel has chosen the answer they want, they'll find the correct dialogue card and insert it into the holder here. Here's an example of a card with 4 possible responses on it. The chisel will insert the card into the holder like this. Then they'll pass it face down to the detective doing the questioning. That detective will then be able to flip it up, read the response they've been given, and must decide whether or not they think this is the most useful information. Essentially what they'll be doing is they'll be calling the suspect on their bluff, or in this case, calling out the chisel who's acting as the suspect. What the detective will do is they'll say, I think that that's a load of baloney. And they'll stake one of their hats on it. The chisel will take the hat and they'll say, well, dramatic pause, you are correct. And if the detective was right, it was a load of baloney, which means the chisel had picked an answer other than the most useful information, they'll put the hat down here under the suspect being questioned. This gives the detective leverage over that suspect. More on that in a minute. If the suspect was giving the most useful information they possibly can, then the chisel takes the hat and says, aha! The suspect was trying to be helpful, and puts the leverage onto their chisel board. Now they have leverage over the detective. If the detective was correct and the hat goes under the suspect, then the chisel must provide the detective with the most useful answer. So they'll take out the dialogue card, swap it to the most useful answer, which again will be coded in the book, and then they'll hand it back to the detective. Now that our detective has discovered Suspect 1's most useful information about Suspect 1, they'll write it in the appropriate slot here on their case sheet. And that resolves the questioning. There's just a few more steps that we didn't cover. So there are 3 additional things that can happen during this questioning process to complicate matters further. The first is that the chisel can use their leverage over the detective who's doing the questioning in order to block certain things. For example, if our green detective asks questions about Suspect B and Suspect C, then the chisel can actually spend their green leverage here, returning the hat to the player in order to block the question. That just means for the rest of this turn, that player cannot ask that question. When the chisel does this, the hat is returned to the owner. If you've got the scratch, you can pay 2. So even though the chisel has blocked you, you can pay 2 scratch to get around it with the goon action. It may also be the case that the red detective wants to listen in on the conversation because she doesn't want to miss out on what's going on. After green has announced, I'm talking to Suspect B about Suspect C, the red detective would go over here and take up their 2 snitch tokens. The red player will choose either to pass, in which case nothing will happen, or bribe, but they'll do this in secret. They'll put one of the tokens down here on their player board, and it will be revealed later on. If you don't have enough money to snitch, then you must put your pass token face up to show that you're too broke to afford a snitch. You would then proceed with the rest of the process as normal, regardless of whatever they choose. Whatever the final piece of information that detective sees, whether it's the most useful response because they challenged or unknown, the final information they see is also shown to any detectives that had a snitch. So any detectives who are not the questioning detective reveal their snitch tokens. So in this case, the red player has chosen a bribe. They'll pay 3 to snitch, and they'll get to see whatever was on the answer card themselves. Note that this is only the final one, so they can't choose to challenge this if they don't believe it. If they'd revealed a pass token, then they do nothing. After the question has been chosen, and all other detectives have locked in whatever snitch token they want to use, then the chisel can choose to spend leverage to block snitching. They can take a hat belonging to a specific detective and block their snitch attempt. The chisel doesn't know whether they've passed or bribed. This may be completely ineffectual. They just don't know. But they might not want to take the risk of the red detective potentially finding out what's on this question card. So they return the hat to the red player, and the red player discards their snitch token. They won't be able to snitch this round. Note that this is done before the snitch is paid, so they don't lose the scratch. Finally, the green player can always use their leverage over a suspect when questioning a suspect. If they decide that they don't want to play this game of snitches and the chisel's leverage, they just want to make sure they get the answer that they want. If you have leverage over a suspect, you can spend it, and this has two effects. This means that the chisel must provide you with the most useful answer, guaranteed. Furthermore, when you spend this leverage, other players lose their opportunity for a snitch, which means that you will get the most useful information and no other players will get it. And then, once you've spent your leverage, you return it to the pool in front of you. And that's the questioning action. This is the vast majority of the game, and it's where most of the chisel's decision-making takes place. Really, the last thing we can look at are these hidden evidence cards. Sometimes you'll be instructed to look at a piece of evidence. In that case, you pick it up, you look at it, and you put it back. Then, to show that you know what it is, you put your knowledge marker on it. If at any point an evidence card has knowledge tokens from every detective present in the game, you just flip it face up, and now it's known to everyone. And the knowledge markers can be returned to the appropriate detectives. But sometimes detectives are sneaky. Sometimes they find a piece of evidence and they want to get a bit of a head start on their opponents, so they take it away with them. If you ever see this hand symbol on an evidence card, that means that you can grab it. You take the card and you put it next to your player board. Then you take one of these evidence removed by tokens and put it here into the slot where the card should be. Place one of your knowledge tokens on the center of the card to show that you took the evidence. If a piece of evidence is removed, then find the corresponding evidence token and place it 3 days on from the current day. This is the day the evidence must be checked into police evidence at the police station. When the turn marker reaches this space, the player who took the card will have to return it face up to the board so everyone can see it. And this token can be returned to the chisel. The evidence removed card is just returned to the chisel as well. If a detective has a piece of evidence or knows something, you can go a bit below the belt to find out what information they have. If you're in the same space as a detective, you can spend 2 scratch to look at a card they have knowledge of. This could be a card on their person, or it could be a card on the information track with their knowledge marker beneath it. The officer is the exact same action, but you can only do it at police stations, and it's more expensive. However, you don't pay the money to the detective. In this instance, the money just goes straight to the communal pool. It will be pretty obvious when a player is being instructed to look at a piece of evidence, because it will say, look at letter. Just a few little bits and pieces before we wrap this up. Remember that searching is really, really important. You want to search people and you want to search locations because searching is never a lie. Whatever you find is the truth. Or true to some circumstance that led to that evidence being there. But people and suspects, when questioned, can tell lies. Chisels. The most useful information is always written in red in the Chisel Handbook. Finally, you must uncover these cards if you want to use them as evidence. You cannot take a guess on your detective case sheet. You must have knowledge of the card, or it must be face up, in order for you to enter it onto your case book. Favorite cards can pretty much be checked in whenever you want. That is to say that all of the favorite cards are different, so you're never really sure which one you're going to have and when it's going to do something, so make sure you read the card before the game begins. Grift cards are exactly the same as favor cards, so make sure you read the card chisels before you begin the game so you know what to do with it. What I haven't done here is gone over all the rules for the head-to-head mode, which is a 2-player mode involving one detective and a chisel, or the cooperative mode, which is called Sleuth mode, where there is no chisel at all. But if you understand these fundamentals of how the game basically works, then you should easily be able to implement either of those 2 game variants. And with that, we reach the end of this rules explanation for Detective City of Angels. I hope this has helped you to prepare for your own casework at home. If you would like to see some gumshoes in action, I'll be joined by Michael and Chris tomorrow as we take on a case in 1930s Los Angeles. Of course, that will be a full playthrough, so it will be totally full of spoilers. We're going to do veteran case, The Last Embrace. So I hope you'll consider coming to join us for that. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Bye everyone!